Somewhere in the North Atlantic, on the night of July 25th, 1956, 51 people went to sleep and never woke up. They were passengers on the most beautiful ocean liner Italy had ever built, a ship so grand, so celebrated, that people called her the Floating Art Museum. Her name was the Andrea Doria, and before the sun came up the next morning, she was gone. This is not a story about the Titanic. This is a story about a collision that should never have happened between two ships in the modern age of radar on a night thick with fog. It is a story about human error, fractured decisions, and the razor-thin line between rescue and catastrophe. It is a story about the people who survived and the ones who didn't. It began, as most great tragedies do, with a ship at the height of her glory. The SS Andrea Doria launched from Genoa, Italy in 1951. She was the pride of the Italian line, 700 feet long, weighing nearly 30,000 gross tons, capable of carrying over 1,200 passengers and 500 crew members. She was fitted with 2 state-of-the-art radar systems, 3 outdoor swimming pools, elaborate murals, hand-woven tapestries, and a first-class dining room that rivaled the finest restaurants in Rome. She was, by every measure, a masterpiece. More than a ship, she was a statement. Italy, devastated by World War II, had rebuilt, and the Andrea Doria was proof. By July 1956, she had completed 100 transatlantic voyages. She was a veteran of the sea, dependable, celebrated, adored. Passengers paid top dollar just to say they had sailed on her. On this particular voyage, she was carrying 1,706 souls, passengers and crew combined, from Genoa to New York City. Among them were American tourists, Italian immigrants chasing a new life, and wealthy socialites. There were honeymooners, there were children, there were old women who had survived the war and were finally going home. They had no idea what was waiting for them in the fog. On the other side of the Atlantic, the Stockholm was leaving New York. She was a Swedish ocean liner, smaller, sturdier, built with a reinforced ice-breaking bow designed for the frigid waters of Scandinavia. She was heading east toward Sweden, while the Andrea Doria was heading west toward America. 2 ships, 2 directions on one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, the North Atlantic Corridor, just south of Nantucket Island. Both ships had radar, both crews could see what was coming, and that is precisely what makes this story so devastating. By late afternoon on July 25th, the Andrea Doria had entered a thick wall of fog. Captain Piero Calami, a veteran mariner with decades of experience, ordered a reduction in speed, but not enough. Maritime law required ships to slow to a safe speed in low visibility. The Andrea Doria was still traveling at approximately 21.8 knots, nearly full speed. Captain Calami later maintained that his radar gave him confidence. He could see the approaching vessel on his screen. He believed there was enough time. He believed they would pass safely. He was wrong. At 10:45 in the evening, the 2 ships detected each other on radar at a distance of about 17 miles. The Stockholm's 3rd officer, Johan Ernst Karstens Johansson, just 26 years old, left largely alone on the bridge, was plotting the course himself. His calculations suggested the Andrea Doria would pass safely on the starboard side. He held his course. On the Andrea Doria, the radar told a different story. The approaching ship appeared to be veering, moving toward them. Captain Calami ordered a sharp turn to port, to the left, hoping to swing the stern away and let the Stockholm pass behind them. It was the worst decision he could have made. The Stockholm, meanwhile, had turned to starboard, to the right. Both ships were now turning toward each other. At 11:10 p.m., in a fog so thick the crew couldn't see a hand in front of their face, the Stockholm's reinforced bow tore into the starboard side of the Andrea Doria like a blade. The impact was catastrophic. The Stockholm's bow, 40 feet of steel, carved 11 feet into the Andrea Doria's side, ripping open 5 of her 11 decks. Cabins were destroyed in an instant. People asleep in their beds were killed before they could open their eyes. Others were hurled from their bunks, thrown against walls, crushed under collapsed ceilings. The ship shuddered violently, then groaned, a sound survivors described as the cry of a wounded animal. Among the dead was a 14-year-old girl named Linda Morgan, or so everyone thought. In one of the strangest survival stories in maritime history, Linda was actually thrown from her bed in the Andrea Doria and landed unconscious on the bow of the Stockholm itself, the very ship that had struck hers. She was discovered hours later by Stockholm crew members, confused, injured, but alive. She became known in the days that followed as the Miracle Girl. Not everyone was so lucky. The Andrea Doria began to lean almost immediately after impact. Within minutes, she had tilted 20 degrees to her starboard side. This one fact would prove to be as deadly as the collision itself. The ship carried 16 lifeboats, enough for everyone on board in theory, but because of the severe list, the portside lifeboats were suspended uselessly in the air, unable to be lowered. The starboard side boats were half submerged in the water. Effectively, the Andrea Doria had lost access to half her lifeboats before a single one had been launched. People began to panic. Passengers who had no life jackets pushed past those who did. Crew members, many of them poorly trained for emergencies, struggled with the boats. The ship's list made every step across the tilting deck a battle. Furniture slid, bottles shattered, children screamed. The lights flickered but held. In one of the most remarkable chapters in modern maritime history, help came from multiple directions at once. The Stockholm herself, damaged but not sinking, turned back to assist. The French ocean liner Île-de-France, the largest ship in the rescue fleet, reversed course and arrived at the scene, flooding the darkness with her searchlights. Coast Guard cutters, cargo ships, and military vessels all converged on the coordinates broadcast by the Andrea Doria's desperate radio calls. The Île-de-France alone would rescue 753 survivors that night. Her captain, Raoul de Baudian, lowered 11 lifeboats into the sea and organized a rescue effort of extraordinary efficiency and courage. Later, survivors would say that when they saw the lights of the Île-de-France glowing through the fog, they wept. It looked, one woman said, like a city appearing out of nowhere. It looked like God. The rescue operation lasted through the night and into the early morning hours. Passengers were pulled from lifeboats, from the water, from the tilting decks of the Andrea Doria itself. Many had broken bones, some were in shock. A few clung to debris in the dark water, treading in the cold Atlantic, waiting to be found. At 9:45 in the morning on July 26, 1956, 11 hours after the collision, the Andrea Doria finally gave up the fight. She rolled onto her starboard side and slipped beneath the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean, 225 feet down, about 50 miles south of Nantucket. More than 46,000 tons of steel, art, furniture, luggage, lives, and memory gone in seconds. Crew members watching from nearby ships fell silent. Some cried. Captain Calamai, who had been removed from the ship against his will by his officers, who could not allow him to go down with her, reportedly stood at the rail of the rescue ship, watching his vessel disappear, and said nothing. He never commanded a ship again. He lived out the rest of his life in Genoa, largely in seclusion, carrying the weight of that night until he died in 1972. 51 people died in the collision and its immediate aftermath. Given the scale of the disaster and the nighttime timing, the dense fog, the listing, the compromised lifeboats, maritime historians often remark that the death toll was astonishingly low. More than 1,600 people were saved. It was, in every sense, a miracle of rescue logistics. But the legal aftermath was less tidy. Both the Italian line and the Swedish-American line filed lawsuits against each other, each blaming the other's navigation decisions for the disaster. The case was headed for a lengthy and complicated trial. Instead, in January 1957, the two companies settled out of court and sealed the key testimonies and navigational records from public view. For decades, the full truth of who turned where and when remained obscured behind legal silence. Investigators, journalists, and historians pieced together what they could. The consensus that emerged placed blame on both sides: the Andrea Doria for traveling too fast in heavy fog, and the Stockholm for a navigational error by her junior officer. 2 ships, 2 mistakes, 1 catastrophe. Today, the wreck of the Andrea Doria lies off the coast of Nantucket, and she has drawn hundreds of scuba divers over the decades, lured by both her history and the artifacts still rumored to rest inside her corroding hull. She has claimed the lives of at least 16 divers who underestimated her currents, her depth, and her collapse. She is, even in death, dangerous. Even in death, she does not give up her dead easily. What remains beyond the wreck is the story. A story about the hubris of believing that technology, radar, steel, modern engineering can substitute for caution. A story about the terrifying speed of disaster and the extraordinary capacity of ordinary people to save each other in the dark. A story about the men who froze and the men who didn't. About a teenage girl thrown from one ship to another and surviving to tell the tale. About a captain who stood on his sinking bridge and called for help, and the French captain who heard him and turned his ship around. On July 25, 1956, 2 ships met in a fog-covered stretch of the North Atlantic, and everything that could go wrong did. 51 people died, more than 1,600 lived, and the most beautiful ship Italy ever built slipped silently beneath the sea. The Andrea Doria is gone, but in the cold water south of Nantucket, she still waits, 225 feet down, in the dark, a monument to the night the modern world was reminded of something ancient and unforgiving, that the ocean does not care how beautiful your ship is.